I will show you in this tutorial how to make a neck warmer. You can download the pattern from somewhere. Just download the pattern and print it out. It's already ready to be printed out on any A4 or letter size paper. It would take you 4 pieces of paper that I will show you how to stick together. And then you can make this one. You would need downproof fabric. If you want to make the lined version, and I will tell you later why you would want or not want a lined version, you need some nice lining, mostly something that would wick moisture away, or just at least something that is nice to the skin. And then down or any synthetic insulation that you would want to stuff into this, but not the ones that you cut out, but the ones, I mean, you can do, but you will just have to think about it yourself, how to apply, whatever, maybe you can do it, why not? And some snaps, I use KAM snaps, K-A-M. I think it's a type of snap, it's not a brand, maybe it's a brand and a type at the same time. You can use any kind of snaps or magnets or anything, and just little pieces of ribbon, which also you could make out of fabric. So you basically need just some downproof fabric, and down, or just any fabric and then synthetic insulation, and sewing machine. That's it. And scissors, some glue, some paper. You know, I hope. So let's see how you can make one. So, given you printed out the pattern and checked that the dimensions of the outside box are 19 centimeters by 25, then you need to assemble the pieces of printed pattern. It's simple and self-explanatory, but I will just make it with you so that you can see how I do it. For cutting papers, I use separate cutting mat, just not to be worrying too much about my fabric cutting mat, not to make too many cuts on it. So, just cut out right side of first 3 pages. Oh, this is 2. So they are marked A1, A2. A is just for the row. In this design we have only 1 row on the pattern, so we don't need to think about that. Now there are 2 options, either using glue or tape. I'm a little bit low on tape, so I prefer using glue, but you can use either. I'll show you both. So these circles are present here for easier alignment, mostly in the pieces of pattern where there is no lines to align, like if it's a bigger pattern and it's just the middle of the back of the jacket. There are not much lines going on, so the circles allow you to visually quite simply align. You see, because our eye is quite sensitive to circle, it's quite a good... Okay, with tape, what would I do with tape? With tape, actually, it's not that nice because you'll have to put the tape on the face of the pattern, and I don't like the look that much. Of course, you can do, but it's only for this pattern, mostly for a small pattern, because there are outside areas to keep the pattern nice. Just put the pieces of tape in the areas that would be cut later on. Turn upside down. I bet there are many other ways to stick them together. It's such a simple thing, you'll figure it out yourself. I don't need to show many things to you. Okay, the glue needs to dry, but if you put only a little bit of glue and spread it quite well, it actually is ready to go almost as soon as you finish the last one and gave it just a second to dry out. And generally, okay, if it's not super precise, of course, I don't like losing precision on the stage before I even cut the pattern, but it's not a criminal thing. cut it with my knife, or sometimes I put a blade that I keep only for paper in the rotary cutter, but I find that regular knife works better because you see exactly the point where you're cutting, so you can follow the line very well. With rotary cutter you can do it as well. Maybe I'm just not as experienced, but I still kind of prefer all the way. And remember to always cut inside the line, just on the inner edge of the line, because when you would be tracing the pattern piece on the fabric, you would create a line outside of your cut piece. And when you will cut the fabric piece, it would then be exactly the same dimensions that it should be. But if you cut outside of black line right now at this stage, or in the middle of it, when you will be transferring it to paper, you would grow the whole thing by just ½ millimeter. It's not a crime, but generally it's a good practice, especially when you trace in pattern piece, to create a new pattern piece out of it. If you trace it 10 times, each time cutting not inside the black line, you will just grow, you can grow it by 5 millimeters, and this is already significant, especially if it's curved areas of the sleeve, for example. Think of armhole on the main piece and on the sleeve itself. If they one grows bigger and one grows smaller because of convex and concave curve respectively in these parts, it would grow unevenly, so any growth of 1 millimeter on each would result in growth in 2 millimeters total, 2 millimeter discrepancy, not 2 millimeter bigger, so it would be harder to set the sleeve in. You see on the cut piece there is no black, and if I overlap this cut piece over the white background, you see whole black line is there, so no black line here almost. Have our pattern piece. Now we need to prepare it for cutting it from fabrics, so we need to cut out notches and drill holes. These are my two tools that I use for that. This is a notch maker that allows you to just clip. Actually, from thin paper it would not work so well, so it doesn't cut all the way, but it's just, anyway, it doesn't matter. If you get a new notch maker, it's unlikely you will have to do it, to shear it manually like I do. So now to the drill holes. Of course, we would not be actually making a hole, but they are called drill holes because when industrially fabrics are cut, there is no marking happening with a whatever pen or soap or chalk or anything. It's just drilled tiny hole through all the layers of fabric. But we will just use it for marking, even though it's still called drill hole. Okay, obviously this rod corresponds to snap position. These notches correspond to location of these ribbon tabs, and this is the opening through which this will be stuffed and then closed. So you see the stitch of close in this piece. This notch serves double purpose. I generally like to optimize not to have too many notches. If one notch can serve as a notch for top notch of opening and bottom notch for the ribbon, that's what I will do. So now we are ready to start cutting fabrics. In the specs you can see the size of the fabric piece that you need in order to be able to cut this project. I will be using some scrap fabric, not scrap, it's quite a huge piece for a scrap, but it's just big enough for this project. You want to align it horizontally. This is a selvage of fabric. Selvage is the edge that is when you roll on the bolt. This is what you see on the edges. So this is the edge. This is straight grain. So we would want to cut two pieces like this. One would be face piece, and it would have marks for snaps, and one for the lining piece, which would not be visible if you are making a lined version, because it would be then doubled with this inner lining. But this is we still need two layers of down-proof fabric. That's why we are cutting two pieces from this fabric in order for the down to be enclosed. And then this is just for skin comfort. If you're planning to wear this neck warmer on top of some neck gaiter or some other things that would anyway cover the skin on your neck, you can forego this layer, because this layer is just a nice to skin moisture wicking fabric that just makes it okay to wear directly on the skin, even if you sweat a little bit and so on, because this fabric, when you sweat, it doesn't feel nice at all. It feels clammy and sticky to the skin. So if you are not going to wear it directly on the skin, just cut two pieces like this and nothing else. If you're going to make this version of it, we still cut two pieces like this, because we need an inner layer here to keep the down, because we cannot use this fabric as just a lining, one layer lining, because it's not down proof. So we still need two pieces like this to hold the down inside, and then cut just one layer of fabric that you want to be next to your skin. In the beginning I used to just cut silk lining, like thin, nice matte silk that is also non-sticky to the skin. It was very nice, but then before I had any more technical fabric. But silk also doesn't work well with the skin, so I would advise any base layer fabric that has moisture wicking properties and you just like how it feels to skin. But not too heavy, it shouldn't be too heavy or too have too much structure on its own, just to be able to still be packable and just be a good match for the down garment. So it's up to you what to choose. So to cut, I first mark. I use for marking, sometimes I use just a pencil. Sometimes I use soap. I have these tiny bits and it's just bigger one. It depends on color of the fabric, how easy it would be for me to see the line after I traced the pattern piece. I will use soap for this time because it produces clear white lines that you could see, and the pencil produces nice fine lines that is better for precision, but you wouldn't be able to see it on camera, so it's up to you what to choose. I use some pattern weights, which are some hardware pieces that are heavy, and I had line around. You could use anything, bags of sands, you can make it itself. Just find piece of metal that is suitable, whatever. Just don't pin the pattern to the fabric, if only in the seam allowances. But still, it's just faster to do it without. If you printed your pattern on a thick cardstock or you glued it after printing on a thin paper, you glued it to the thick cardstock, you can directly use a rotary cutter and cut it without tracing, which is sweet, but I'll go with the option that you don't have any thick paper and you just had a thin printer paper where you printed your pattern. Just go as close to the edge as you can, so that we don't grow our piece too much. And because now we are marking the main piece, we are going to mark also. Actually, these pieces, these marks I will still mark with a pen because when I would be ironing later on during assembly, the soap marks would disappear under high enough temperature or a little bit of steam. So I prefer to have marks that will stay. Now we are going to make a lining piece. For that we shall turn the pattern on the reverse side because for these notches to correctly align when you're assembling, the piece should be mirrored left to right. So for that reason we turn it upside down. And actually on the lining piece we don't need to put all the marks. On the lining we need to mark only the opening because the ribbon pieces will be first basted to the main piece. Okay, and we don't need the snap marks because it just suffices to have them on the front. And if we will have a lining made of different fabric, they are anyway not going to be visible on this piece. Let's cut this right away. For cutting I use, my table is covered basically with cutting mats, almost all the surface of it, so I can directly, after tracing, I can use my rotary cutter and cut it out. You can cut it of course with scissors as well. I just recently found that it's much faster, not much faster, but faster to cut with a rotary cutter, and as well less tiring for my hands. You actually don't need to put too much pressure, especially if your blade is fresh, and it's good to replace your blade often, just because that will damage the cutting mats less because you will be exerting less pressure while cutting, so they will stay longer smooth and therefore more usable. I also use smaller rotary cutter for making notches. That's because with big rotary cutter I cannot see how far I cut. It's better to make notches. So basically, notches, we just slightly cut it. Not all the way, not all the mark we don't need. Even the seam allowance here is 10 millimeters and it would allow you to cut more, but you just need some little slit in that would be visible to you when you would be assembling. So just something that you would be able to see even when you turn fabric upside down, when you don't see the face that is marked. That's basically the reason to have notches. So let's cut the second piece. I hold this rotary cutter like this, in this position, because I find it that for my wrist is much less tiring than doing this. Because this is a position where it's different, it's bent, but like this is just straight, and you push. Quite nice. But this is also not I think it's the rotary cutter that is made to be able to be held like this. I don't know if all of them are convenient for such kind of cutting. Also for tight curves, I like to use a small one. It just rolls much easier than the bigger. Okay. Also, the fact that we did different notches allows me to tell which one is lining, which one is the face, even though they are same in this design. Now I will cut the inner fabric. Here we would also need to make a notch for the opening. So that's why we would have it from this side. A few words about the moisture wicking fabrics. So this fabric, you see, it has this grid. This is inside of the fabric. Potentially, if you make a base layer out of it, this would be on the outside, the smooth part, and the grid part would be next to your skin. Here, on this neck warmer, I use the grid part as the part that faces to your skin as well, but it becomes the part that is on outside of the neck warmer. So I don't go with a regular, just like the face fabric should be on the face. So when you have moisture wicking fabrics, I believe they work one way, so they can suck moisture that is next to their inner face, not the outer face. So I advise you to do accordingly to keep it functional. So we have our 3 pieces cut. Now we just need to prepare 2 pieces of ribbon. You don't need to see all of it, it's okay. 2 pieces of ribbon that would go here. Why we need these pieces of ribbon, by the way, is because when you snap it on your neck, first of all, it's easier to open, to start opening. You wouldn't have to grab just side of the neck warmer itself. It's easier to grab and start opening. As well, when you're closing it behind your neck and you don't see what you are doing, it's much easier to find those and to align and to snap it in place. So here is a ribbon that we will be using. We need to cut 2 pieces that are 6 centimeters each. I also like to fire the edges so they don't fray in the process of assembly. So now these are all the pieces that we would need apart from down and snaps, but this would be used at the last stages. So now to start, that's what we need. So first thing that we will do is we will baste, fold it in 2 pieces of ribbon to the edge of the main piece, aligning it with the notches. In this design, I don't align it flush with the edge, I align it offset by 1 centimeter. Why? Because this would serve, this piece, when we sew it all together and turn inside out and the piece sticks out like this, would serve as a reinforcement inside for the top snap. So when you would be pulling on the tab, it would not be just pulling the fabric next to the snap, but it would be actually pulling the snap out. So just align it with the edge, with notches, and just move it outwards 1 centimeter. Sorry to all the people who do not use centimeters in their daily life. I know it will be a little difficult. In the written description, I am also listing all the measurements in the inches as close as possible to dimensions that I use, but of course there would be a little bit off because 10 millimeters do not correspond exactly to some amount of 1/8 of an inch. Anyway, so now we will baste these pieces, basting not by hand but based by machine. It's basically stitch at any distance inside seam allowance. So seam allowance here is 10 millimeters. So 5 millimeters seam from the edge or 7 millimeters from the edge, we are basting this just to keep them in place for later assembly, not to have to think and manipulate them while assembling bigger pieces together. Here, first separation complete. Tabs are in place. I also attached my label because this is actually, I'm making now an order that I got a few days ago. You could also attach your label, but no, actually you can't, because this is functional cloth and lab design. The next operation is we will baste the lining with a lining, the outer lining with the inner lining. Be sure to not mix up the inner side of the downproof fabric with the outer side, because sometimes they work only from one side to hold it down. If you are not using an outer lining, just skip this step. If your outer lining, this part, is actually not so flowy and tends to escape when sewing, you might want to skip this step as well, because this step is just to hold these 2 pieces together so they act as one in the next stage. But even if your outer lining is stable, I still advise you to baste it along the opening where we have these notched marks, so that when you are stuffing with down, the neck warmer, you could not accidentally stuff the down between those two layers. You don't want that. So now we will just baste these two pieces together. I pin it in few places just because this tends to escape, and pinning a seam allowance downproof fabric is not a crime. It just makes my life easier, so why not? But because this fabric is also stretchy, when sewing, it can be pulled unevenly by a sewing machine. That could also create problems that you don't want. So pinning helps with that, with the control of the even fit between both layers. When basting, you can actually use a stitch that is longer in order to spend a little bit less of thread and just go faster. So here is our two lining pieces, inner and outer, basted together. Also, like, what have I done? It's 4 or 5 millimeters from the edge, just to connect them. Next step is to connect these two pieces. Now we actually wouldn't need that many pins, because these two pieces now are stable, but I still will pin them somewhat, especially starting from the notches that we've got, so that we are well aligned. And it's just easier to handle it when it's pinned. You just don't need to pay that much attention to it. Here we don't have notches. That's why I sometimes pin, even though this is not how it is done industrially, professional as a factories. There is no pins, there are no pins, but it's okay. We are at home. We can do whatever we want if it works for us. Yes? You know what I mean? Yeah, you see now, actually this layer a little bit, you see from stitching, it got a little bit, how to say, shrunk by the edges. So you need to a little bit stretch it. That's why it doesn't align perfectly. If you just have two pieces of this fabric without the extra lining piece, and you just simply can take them to your sewing machine without pinning, and most likely it will come out just fine. Okay, these corners, now you will see while sewing, we would be going slower and with smaller stitch lengths. Generally I use stitch length number 3, which I actually don't know if it corresponds to 3 millimeters. Maybe not 3 millimeters. Maybe not, but anyways, you know your regular stitch lengths, and you know what is a smaller stitch length for you and your machine. So when going around this curve, just go to the smaller one and go slow to create a smooth curve. I know it's a little pain in the ass, but these kind of corners are necessary when you wear it, because you close it and then on the back this creates nice coverage. If you just cut it out and cut straight, it would be like this nice coverage that can sit on your back of your neck nicely. So bear with me, you can make it, I believe in you. Let's go to sewing machine and sew all the way by the perimeter, leaving the opening. So don't forget to triple stitch the opening. Triple stitch means just when you finish, go back and forth, at least one time back and forth. Just for when you would be turning it inside out, so that it doesn't start opening, because there would be a little bit of pulling and pushing, and then when you stuff as well, so that it just stays nice and neat. Here it is already stitched, seam allowance 10 millimeter. Here is, I think it's visible, smaller stitch lengths here, a little bigger here. The opening. I actually also like to fire the opening in the fabrics that I know tend to fray. but be careful, just don't ruin your work. We turn it inside out. Oh, no, actually, I myself often forget this stage. So we have concave curves and convex curves. So when turning inside out, concave curves need to be slightly slit in order to lay flat. So imagine, because this part would now be all inside when we turn inside out. But this, you see already, it's bunching up because this line is shorter than the line where it would potentially need to lie down. So we need to make small slits all the way in the curve. Also, sometimes I actually cut down the seam allowance. So now you see? Oh, wait, first I'll show, then I'll tell you. So now, when we turn inside out, it would lie flat without creating any tension here. Sometimes I like also to cut down all the way seam allowance. It's not necessary, it's just to remove a little bit of bulk. I certainly do cut out some of it, and I recommend that in these parts because, again, the same reason. When you turn it inside out, all of this fabric would need to be sitting in this corner. It's a lot of fabric, and you don't need it. And because this seam is never going to be under a lot of tension, that's why there is no risk if seam allowance is not 10 millimeters. I actually leave it in this design 10 millimeters just for ease of operation, or for when some fabrics are framed too much, so that during the process it doesn't get destroyed too much. If my seam allowance would be 5 millimeters, it would just be a little bit more difficult to work, and I would have to be more careful. But just 5 millimeters more, and cutting it to desired width after it's ready to be turned inside out is also okay. So now you see, because we cut quite a lot, a much smaller amount of fabrics that would be there. Also here is slightly concave curve. For that reason, I just also cut it shorter. So this is one way. When it's short, it doesn't create so much bulk. Now you see what I'm doing. My hand just wants to cut out all this seam allowance. Okay, I'll do it on the bottom part, just to show you that both things work, both with slits, with a seam allowance that is left as it is, and with a shortened seam allowance. Okay. Oh, you see? No, you don't see it. No, you see something. That is I cut the curve, and again, my cutting mat got quite noticeably. I had to straighten this now. Actually, I really want to cut a little bit of this too. So, okay, do what you want, but you've heard my reasoning. If your fabric frays too much, just be careful. Leave it as it is, especially if you do not use extra lining fabric, because that's what is the main of bulk here in this design. Or if your fabric is not so bulky as mine. Okay, so okay, now our curves are ready to be turned inside out. I even need instruction to do that. I also kind of shake it. It's hard to show on the video. I do this. And up. It's almost where it should be. Then I just iron it. It's also not that necessary of a step, ironing. But it just makes it nicer, because after stuffing, you would not iron it. Just push these corners, try to make them more smooth before ironing with your finger from the inside. So here it is, ironed and ready to be stuffed. I ironed the opening seam allowances too, so that they are folded and already in the position of how they will be when this garment would be finished. So now this time is to stuff it. I have separate video about stuffing down garments. I will not be showing it to you here. Or basically, if you decided to do this, and it's likely that you have worked with down. But this is a super easy garment. Actually, if you're doing your first garment filled with down, just try to push the down inside. Basically, that's an easy concept. So here it is stuffed. I close the opening with pins really, really close to the edge, basically where the seam will go. I forgot to show you that I weigh the shell before stuffing and after stuffing in order to know that I stuffed enough down. Of course, you can go by feel, but I figured out a good number for this design, so could be useful. So the finished one for this is is 29 grams. And before stuffing it was 21 gram. 28 and a half, I see it, want to tell me. These clocks, you see, 29, are not too precise. These are just kitchen ones, so they don't have half grams. But it's okay for what you can find it probably in your house. So I stuff 8 grams in one neck warmer. So now is the last step, just to sew it close. You've noticed I've used, not the last step, of course we need snaps. One before last. You've noticed that I've used black thread all throughout because we have the black lining and here it doesn't show. It's okay to use black. But now I will change my top thread to match with the color of the outer part, and we'll keep the black thread on the back so that it's nice. So here it is closed. Pretty fluffy. Also, I use this roller to remove bits of down that might have stuck during the process of stuffing. It's actually surprisingly this time clean. Don't see almost any down. The last step is snap installation. I use what is called cam snaps. I don't remember how this, what this stands for. The black ones. And where is it too? And this. You can use any other snaps that you have at your disposal. Maybe it's even magnetic snaps. That would be wonderful. But I like these ones because they are very light and easy to install, easy to open. They are not too heavy like some metallic snaps are harder to open, so you have to pull harder and it might damage lightweight garments. So I like these plastic cam snaps. It's very easy to install them. So you see our marks. Of course, when we are sewing, there are some discrepancies flowing in. So you see the first mark not quite aligned with the center of the gross grain ribbon, so I would just align it to make it nicer. Just making sure that they would align between each other, but it's the next step. So let's do the first one. With cam snaps it's easy, you just poke the hole with the awl through, insert the cap, then insert the part. Here it is, ready. So then I would install the opposite snap. Here is the mark, it is more precise, more aligned, just better. Just don't forget I installed another piece, so I have here 2 different pieces. So just don't forget to alternate them. Of course, it's quite easy to remove the cam snap even if you have made a mistake. Even if you have made a mistake. But it's much better not to make mistakes and to do it right away. So let's check the first one. Then just you could install. Actually, yeah, I didn't say it. I remove the all down. I kind of flap it so this becomes really flat, and all down migrates so that I can install snaps. And I've done it before closing this seam. Also, I removed hold down so that it's out of the way. So I'm installing all the snaps on one side, and then I would be just installing one by one on another side, aligning each next one so that there is no unevenness between two sides. So now I will close this, and we'll just try to actually eyeball and see if this mark, or I can actually not even eyeball, I can palpate it. I can feel like, this dot seems to be pretty much aligning with the center of this part by my feeling. So I will just go ahead and install the snap. Okay, seems to be pretty okay. So let's see about the next one. Does it seem to be aligned? It seemed to be a little bit off, so in order to locate, I can just find with all the center of the snap. It's okay that we have changed slightly the location, that the notches marks are not exactly where the snaps end up being. We have them to help us, so they help somewhat. Here it is. Ba-ba-bam. Yep. Here is the ready one, fluffy, nice, and ready to warm your neck. I initially designed it to be worn like this and be snapped behind your head, behind, like that. But you can also, with snapping behind, sometimes hair get caught into the snap, so it's actually maybe much nicer to wear it like this. And even if you want to wear it behind, you can just snap it here, and to prevent any hair pulling, to turn it here. But also wearing it here allows you to have a little more ventilation, to have it like this. And it depends what part of your neck gets cold. It's different for everybody. So here is our little nice neck warmer. I would really be happy to see yours. Please send me photos or videos or commentaries about it. It would be really sweet if you do. Thank you for watching and hopefully making this one, and that will keep your neck warm, or neck of your loved ones, for whom, or not necessarily loved ones, but for whoever you decided to make this. Just stay warm. That's what it's all about. Bye.